Two princes walked into the Tower of London. They were never seen alive again. Their killer was never identified. Their bodies were never officially found. And that is not even the most mysterious royal death on this list. Tonight, we examine 8 kings and emperors whose death's history has never been able to explain. And the answers, when there are answers, are darker than the mysteries. History is full of kings who died in battle, kings who were executed, kings who died of plague. These deaths are recorded, documented, understood. Tonight we examine 8 of them, in order of mystery, each one darker than the last, beginning with 2 boys who entered a tower and never came out, and ending with an emperor whose death may have been the greatest deception in the history of European monarchy. Edward V of England was 12 years old. His brother Richard, Duke of York, was 9. In 1483, both boys were placed in the Tower of London by their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who then declared himself King Richard III, and the boys were never seen in public again, ever. What happened to the princes in the Tower is the oldest cold case in English history. The most popular theory is that Richard III had them murdered to eliminate rivals to his throne. But Richard was himself killed at Bosworth Field 2 years later, before he could ever be questioned. In 1674, workmen in the Tower found bones beneath a staircase. 2 children, of the right approximate age. They were assumed to be the princes, and buried in Westminster Abbey. But the bones have never been properly DNA tested, despite repeated requests from historians. The royal family has refused permission for over 50 years, and the question that refusal raises is darker than the mystery itself. What is in those bones? That the crown does not want confirmed? The princes in the Tower disappeared and left bones that nobody will test. But the next death on our list left a body, in full public view, with a wound that made no sense, and a killer who was never found, in a hunting accident that most historians no longer believe was an accident. King William II of England, known as Rufus for his red complexion, died on the 2nd of August 1100 in the New Forest during a hunting trip, shot by an arrow. The arrow passed through his lung. He died before reaching a physician. The official verdict: hunting accident. But the details resist that verdict. The man who fired the arrow, Walter Tyrrell, fled England immediately, without being questioned, without being charged, without ever explaining what happened. William's younger brother, Henry, was present on the same hunting trip. Within hours of William's death, Henry rode directly to Winchester to seize the royal treasury. Within 3 days, he had himself crowned King Henry I. The Pope later granted Walter Tyrrell a full absolution for an accident, which is an unusual thing to absolve. William Rufus had no children, no direct heir. His death was extraordinarily convenient for his brother, who happened to be present, and who became king within 72 hours of the accident. William Rufus died in a convenient accident while his brother watched. But the next death goes back further, to the greatest military mind in ancient history, a man who conquered half the known world by the age of 32, and was dead at 32, in circumstances that the ancient world immediately suspected were murder, and that modern scientists have confirmed may have been something else entirely. Alexander the Great died in Babylon in 323 BC. He was 32 years old. He had just returned from a banquet. He developed a fever, and over 11 days, he deteriorated and died. The ancient sources give different accounts of his symptoms and different suspects: his generals, his cupbearer, his former tutor Aristotle. The most popular modern theory for centuries was poisoning, arsenic, strychnine, wine laced with something. But in 2019, a pathologist proposed something different: Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological condition that causes ascending paralysis that could explain every symptom in the ancient record, including the most disturbing detail of Alexander's death, that his body did not decompose for 6 days after he apparently died, which, if Guillain-Barré syndrome is correct, may mean something extraordinary: that Alexander the Great was not dead when they thought he was dead, that he may have been buried alive, the greatest conqueror in history, possibly conscious, while the world mourned around him, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to stop it. Alexander may have been buried alive by the people who loved him. The next mystery involved a man who may have faked his own death and lived for another 39 years, while his empire mourned a funeral that may have contained someone else entirely. Tsar Alexander I of Russia died in November 1825 in Taganrog, far from his capital, far from his court, of typhus, the official version. But almost immediately a legend began that Alexander had not died, that he had faked his death and disappeared to live as a wandering holy man named Fyodor Kuzmich, who appeared in Siberia shortly after Alexander's reported death, who bore a striking physical resemblance to the Tsar, who died in 1864, 39 years after Alexander's supposed death. In 1926, Soviet authorities opened Alexander's tomb. It was empty. In 2015, DNA testing was proposed to compare remains of Fyodor Kuzmich with the Romanov family line. The Russian Orthodox Church refused permission. An empty tomb, a church refusing DNA tests, a wandering holy man who looked exactly like the Tsar, and 39 years of someone living someone else's life. Alexander I may have escaped his own empire in a coffin, but the next king didn't even leave a coffin. He vanished entirely, rode into battle at 24, was never seen again, and the country he left behind spent 40 years refusing to believe he was dead. King Sebastian of Portugal was 24 years old when he led his army into Morocco at the Battle of Alcácer Quibir in 1578. The Portuguese army was destroyed. Sebastian was never found. No body, no grave, no confirmed death, just gone. And Portugal, unable to accept that their young king was simply dead in a foreign field, created a legend, Sebastianism, the belief that Sebastian was not dead, that he would return on a foggy morning to save Portugal in its hour of need. For men claimed to be Sebastian returned. All four were executed. Portugal waited for over a century for a king who never came back. Was Sebastian killed in battle? Almost certainly, but his body was never confirmed, and a country's grief became a mythology that lasted generations. Sebastian vanished in battle and became a legend, but the next death is different, more disturbing, because it involves a king who never had the chance to live at all, who reigned for 5 days, and whose death or disappearance raises questions about whether he ever existed in the way history claims. John I of France was born on the 15th of November 1316. He was a posthumous son of Louis X, born after his father's death. He was king from the moment he drew his first breath, and he reigned for 5 days. And then he died. He was 5 days old. The official cause of death, unknown, but a counter-legend has persisted for 7 centuries. That baby John did not die, that he was switched at birth by his great-uncle Philip, who became Philip V, and who had every reason to want the infant king dead, that a different child was buried, and John was spirited away to grow up as a merchant in Italy under an assumed name. A man claiming to be John I appeared in the 14th century. He was imprisoned. He died in prison, still claiming to be king, 5 days old, and possibly still alive. Somewhere, if you believe the legend, John I may have been switched as a baby. But the next death goes back 3,000 years to the most famous tomb in history, a boy king, dead at 19, in circumstances that forensic science has spent a century trying to understand, and still cannot fully explain. Tutankhamun was approximately 19 years old when he died, around 1323 BC. His tomb, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, was the most extraordinary archaeological find in history, but it was what was inside the mummy that proved most extraordinary. Modern CT scans of Tutankhamun's body have revealed a severely broken left leg, fracturing consistent with a high-speed impact, possibly a chariot accident, multiple malaria infections, a clubfoot, bone disease, and, most controversially, a fractured skull with bone fragments inside the skull cavity, suggesting either a severe blow to the head or post-mortem damage during mummification. Was Tutankhamun murdered? Possibly. His successor, I, was his Grand Vizier, a powerful man who had every reason to want the young king dead, who married Tutankhamun's widow immediately after his death, who erased Tutankhamun's name from monuments, as if trying to make him not have existed. The evidence points, but does not confirm. The boy king keeps a secret. 3,000 years later, still sealed in the gold of his mask. Tutankhamun's killer may have been the man who immediately married his widow, but the final death on our list is different from all the others, because we have the body, we have the medical records, we have the testimonies of the people present, and we still cannot agree on what killed him, or whether what killed him was natural. Napoleon Bonaparte died on the island of St. Helena on the 5th of May, 1821. He was 51 years old. He had been in British captivity for 6 years. The official cause of death, stomach cancer. For over a century, that was accepted. And then in 1961, a Swedish dentist named Sten Forshovud read Napoleon's memoirs and noticed something. The symptoms Napoleon described in his final years were not the symptoms of stomach cancer. They were the symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning, hair loss, extreme thirst, swollen legs, sensitivity to light, rapid weight changes, all consistent with arsenic. Forshovud obtained a sample of Napoleon's hair and had it tested. The arsenic levels were 13 times higher than normal. The theory immediately attracted attention, and suspects, the British government, who wanted him dead, his French companions on St. Helena, who may have been agents, or the wallpaper, the green wallpaper of Longwood House, which contained copper arsenite, a pigment that in the damp St. Helena climate released arsenic gas that Napoleon breathed every night in his sleep. The most recent forensic analysis suggests the wallpaper theory is most likely an accidental poisoning by his own living conditions. But not everyone is satisfied, because Napoleon himself, in his final recorded words, said something that has never been explained. He said he was being murdered slowly. He named no one. He provided no details. He simply said, "I am being murdered." And then he died. And history has been arguing about it ever since. 8 royal deaths, 2 boys who disappeared into a tower, a king killed in a convenient accident, a conqueror possibly buried alive, a czar who may have walked away from his own funeral, a king who vanished in battle and became a myth, an infant king who may have been switched at birth, a boy pharaoh with a fractured skull, and an emperor who said he was being murdered and then died. In none of these cases does history give us a clean answer. In some, forensic science has come close. In others, the evidence that would answer question is locked in a tomb, or refused by a church, or buried in an archive that no one has yet opened. Subscribe to Veil of Europa. Every week, we pull back the curtain on the history that refuses to stay buried. We'll see you in the shadows